Jessica was driving the highway toward her home. It was Saturday evening. She had taken the children to the parents, where they would stay until Monday, and she had 2 wonderful days ahead of her, when she could sleep, rest, and get herself together. Raising 2 small children alone wasn't easy, but better that than with a psychopathic husband. They weren't divorced, but for the last year they've been separated. She with the children in a private house on the outskirts of a small town. He in a psychiatric hospital where he was sent for compulsory treatment. It all started a year ago when the first disturbing symptoms of mental illness began to appear. At first, when his behavior was strange and not threatening, Jessica pretended that nothing was going on and hoped that it would all go away by itself. Of course it didn't, and with each passing day, his behavior got worse and worse. For the first time, it became clear that he needed help from a psychologist and psychiatrist when he left home in the middle of the night without saying anything to anyone. That was in December, when it was -15 outside, and he was wearing nothing but his pants and slippers. Jessica found him missing in the morning, and by lunchtime, he arrived home with a police escort. The police found him near an old factory far away from home. Jessica thought at that time that he was becoming a danger to himself. 2 weeks later, she realized that he was a danger to the whole family. Parking in front of the house, Jessica got out of the car, picked up her shopping, and went inside. The windows of the neighbor's houses illuminated the front door of her house and part of the stairs. She decided not to put the car in the garage, as she was going to go on her own business in the morning, and there were still memories of the recent incident in the garage. One day, when she came back from work, she was surprised that the street lights on the street and around the house were not lit. Once she was inside the house, she tried to turn on the light, but it wouldn't turn on. Jessica pulled out her lighter with her hand out in front of her. She entered the living room. No one was there. She called out loudly to her husband, but he didn't answer. From the living room, she moved to the kitchen, but it was empty there as well. Before she passed out from a hard blow to the head, she heard the floor crack behind her. Jessica woke up in the garage. She was sitting in the corner on a chair, tied up tightly. The car engine was running and it was almost impossible to breathe in the garage. She called for help. It did not bring any results. After a while, she let herself losing consciousness. She heard her husband's hysterical laughter coming from outside. Gathering her last strength, she began to shout for him to release her, but he did not respond to all her requests. Jessica was saved from death when she was already unconscious and a neighbor came by and saw smoke from a running car from the garage, opened the gate, pulled her out, and called an ambulance. This event set off a long legal battle, which resulted in Jessica's husband ending up in prison-type psychiatric hospital. The trial was not an easy one. It took a lot of effort to get the trial to end the way Jessica wanted it to. After the incident in the garage, the woman was hooked on strong sedatives. Holding her bag in her hands, Jessica walked into the hallway and turned on the light. She took off her shoes and was about to go into the living room when suddenly she felt something strange for a moment. It seemed to her that she was not alone in the house. Listening to the silence, she felt afraid, and dropping her bags, she pulled out the pills that had always helped her. She took 3 at once, even though the doctor said to take no more than 2 per day. Jessica entered the living room and turned on the light. The atmosphere in the living room was the same as the morning she left the house. With a quick step, she walked through the first floor and turned on the lights wherever she could. Back in the living room, she checked to make sure the gun safe was locked. She had forgotten to lock it once and regretted it very much. It was January, and she had been awakened in the middle of the night by her husband's hysterical laughter. Remembering the incident in the garage, although not fully awake, she instantly cowered with a cold sweat, realizing that this laughter was hysterical. She wasn't wrong. Opening her eyes, she saw a hunting rifle her husband was holding in her face. The rifle was held by her husband, who was laughing a laugh that was not human, and his eyes expressed nothing but madness. He made her go out in the yard in her pajama, and then shouted, "Run!" and started shooting in her direction with little or no aim. She managed to run to the garage and hide. There, shivering from cold and fear, she was able to wait out the gunfire. When he ran out of ammunition, he just dropped the rifle and went to bed. From then on, Jessica was very careful about the gun safe, and every time she went to bed, she made sure it was locked. This time, it was locked. Everything in the house seemed too normal to her, and she couldn't understand what frightened her so much. She even laughed at her foolish behavior, but she was a little nervous. Jessica went to the kitchen to prepare dinner. After cooking the fish in the oven, she went to the living room to the TV. On one of the channels, there was a TV series that she sometimes watched. Suddenly, the show was interrupted and the local news appeared on the screen. It said, "Breaking news." The news reporter looked a little worried. He corrected his microphone a few times and then began the broadcast. A few hours ago, 2 dangerous patients escaped from a prison-type psychiatric hospital located 30 kilometers away from the city. Police are asking citizens to be cautious and to inform them if they see any man matching the description. 2 pictures appeared on the television, one of which Jessica recognized as her husband. She felt her legs go numb, and she laughed as if she were pressed against the couch. She took out her pills. The announcer, meanwhile, reported the detail of the incident. 2 men of the same ward attacked a doctor during rounds. One of them managed to stab him in the shoulder with a long medical knife, and while he was bleeding, they left the ward. They have not been seen since. The presenter's speech was supplemented by pictures of an empty hospital ward with bars on the window, a pool of blood against the wall, and the terrified faces of staff. Staff members were loading a sheet-covered colleague into an ambulance. The presenter promised that they would follow the development of events and wished the viewers all the best. The show reappeared on the screen, but Jessica turned off the TV sound and listened. There was silence in the house. She sat on the couch and thought about the last thing she wanted to hear was her husband laughing hysterically nearby. If it happened now, she would probably just sit there unable to do anything. The effects of the pills did nothing to calm her down but immobilized her limbs and seemed to mess with her brain. Jessica pulled out a can of sedative and popped 2 more pills into her mouth. All of her thoughts suddenly became sluggish, and her vision began to fail. There was a subtle noise coming from the hallway, as if someone was standing there leaning against the door, hesitant to enter. She felt like a rabbit sitting in a cage in the kitchen of an expensive restaurant, waiting for someone to order a rapid dish. She sat staring at the television where the show was continuing. The sudden scene in the attic made Jessica think about her attic. which she hadn't been to in a long time. The attic needed to be sneaked into. Her husband didn't like the place and went up via the railing. With difficulty, she climbed up and reached the gun safe, knelt down in front of it and typed in the combination of numbers. But the safe couldn't open. She tried again, no results. It seemed that with her nervousness, she had forgotten the code. Suddenly, she heard her husband's voice behind her. "Try code 5467. Startled out of her thoughts, Jessica turned around, covering her head with her hands. There was no one behind her. Breathing out a sigh of relief, she ate 2 more pills, returned to the safe, and tried the combination of numbers suggested by her sick imagination. The safe opened. Taking her rifle, Jessica started walking towards the stairs, trying to keep an eye on the door to the living room. As she went upstairs, she tried not to think about the fact that her husband had probably already entered the living room and was standing by the stairs and listening to her footsteps, and she was about to hear his hysterical laughter. Once in the attic, Jessica began to think of the best place to hide in the attic. It was dark because the light bulb had burned out a month ago, and now she was regretting not changing it in a time. She walked to the wall opposite the entrance and pointed the rifle toward the door. Outside the window it was raining, and lightning occasionally flashed, illuminating the loft space. There was a sound familiar to Jessica from below. It was the creak of the 3rd step on the stairs, leading from the living room to the 2nd floor. Then, in a minute, it was quiet. She could hear only the rain outside and thunder. Jessica felt disgusting. Apparently, the sedatives she'd eaten in the last hour were about to take the effect now. The outlines of objects were no longer clear, and the ceiling hung so low that it seemed impossible to stand upright. There was another creaking sound from the 1st floor, but this time much closer, on the 2nd floor level. A little more and he would be there. Jessica thought she could even hear his heavy breathing. She stared at the door through the scope of her rifle, and her body shook with fear. Another flash of lightning illuminated the entrance to the attic, and she saw him. He was dressed in a hospital gown, smeared with blood. In his hand he held a scalpel, and Jessica had already pictured it sticking out of her neck. She shot toward him, and saw that the bullet had hit him in the shoulder and gone clear through, leaving a noticeable hole in the wall. He didn't fall or move. Jessica heard what she feared to hear more than anything else in the world: his hysterical laughter. The laughter was very loud. She realized she was going crazy. She fired another shot. The second wouldn't dissolve part of her head, but the laughter didn't stop. It increased even more. Jessica's nerves failed, and she ran toward the window. Just before the window, she caught her foot on something and broke through the old window frame with her body. The fall lasted no more than 2 seconds, and the landing was not a good one. Her broken spine had left her no chance. Her body lay on the lawn. The TV was still on in the living room on the 1st floor. The show had ended and another newscast was on. The broadcaster didn't seem so excited anymore, and he had a smile on his face. As soon as the microphone was turned on, he began to speak. Both patients of the psychiatric hospital who staged an escape were caught. It turned out that they couldn't even leave the hospital grounds, but hid all this time in the hospital, in one of the doctor's offices. A few hours later, they themselves surrendered to the hospital guards. All is well. We wish everyone a good evening.